welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Stephanie and I really appreciate you all stopping by. In today's video, I have 6 brand new Halloween themed decor DIYs to share that are going to be perfect for kicking off this spooky season. So let's go ahead and jump into project number 1. For this project, I used this large decorative vase that I found at the Goodwill, and I started by cleaning it up really well. I also used this small black candle holder that I found in my stash. I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint the holder and used super glue to attach it to the bottom of the vase for a little bit of height and set it aside to dry for a couple of hours. Next, I grabbed a piece of this scrap floral foam that fits down nicely in the bottom of the vase and some of this black feathered trim that I picked up at Walmart and used hot glue to attach it to the foam, wrapping it around until it was completely covered. I then cut another piece of the trim just long enough to fit in the bottom stem of the vase and placed the foam piece on top and added some more of the trim around it to fill up the bottom. Next, I used this black plastic twig wreath that I picked up on Temu, but I did go ahead and link an identical one in my Amazon storefront down below. I used some wire cutters to cut the zip ties so that I could remove one of the stems, then used a heat tool to shape the pieces of the stem the way that I wanted them to look. I then cut off the bottom 2 twigs and most of the bottom of the stem so that it would fit inside the vase. I then placed it in the center of the floral foam and made sure it fit. I took 3 of these wooden crow ornaments from Amazon, and I do have these linked below as well, and used wood glue to glue them all together for a thicker piece, making sure they were flush on the edges and removing any excess glue with a damp paper towel. Once the crow was dry, I used hot glue to fill in the hole at the top, smoothing it out as much as possible, then used a finger sander to remove any excess glue and smoothed out all of the edges. I took Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and painted the front, back, and sides. Next, I took a small piece of the fake cobwebs from the Dollar Tree and added just a little bit to the tree for a more spooky look. I then placed the crow on one of the smaller inside branches and used a small dab of hot glue to secure it in place, and placed it back inside the vase. To finish up this project, I took these silver and black mini skulls from my stash, but you could definitely paint the ones from the Dollar Tree like this, and scattered them around the bottom of the vase, nestling some in the feathers, and this one is done. This one's very simple and quick to put together, but it makes a lovely centerpiece. For this project, I used one of these hanging wood rounds from the Dollar Tree and started by removing the hanger and filling in the holes at the top with some hot glue, smoothing it out as much as possible. Then once it was completely dry, I sanded over the holes to remove the excess glue and so that everything was nice and smooth. I then took Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and painted the front, back, and sides. Once that was dry, I took apple barrel paint in the color elephant gray, folk art paint in the color medium gray, as well as apple barrel paints in the color dolphin gray, country gray, and black. Starting with the stencil brush and the lightest shade of gray, I added a base layer using a mixture of the stippling technique and brush strokes. I also used a paper towel to remove any excess and to blend it all together. While that was still wet, I took the next slightly darker shade of gray and repeated the same process. I then continued to repeat these steps, working my way all the way up to the darkest shade of gray. Once I was happy with the way it looked, I took the silver gray color and added it over the top to help blend it all together and to finish the base layer. I then took Anita's acrylic paint in white and a wadded up paper towel and heavily stippled it around the outside edges and just a bit in the center to blend everything together a little bit more. Finally, I used a clean damp paper towel and stippled on some of the black paint around the center, keeping it mostly confined to the left side, then immediately followed up with the same paper towel with more of the white paint to dull down the black until I was happy with the way it looked. I'm really happy with how this moon turned out. I traced this image of a witch riding a broom with her cat and a few bats from the computer to fit the center of the moon. I placed a piece of carbon paper with the shiny side down in the middle of the moon and placed the witch on top using some scotch tape to hold it in place. I then traced the image with a pen to transfer it over onto the moon. Once I had the image transferred, I took some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and watered it down just a little bit and filled in the image, and this one is done. Y'all, I think this turned out absolutely stunning. I love it. For this project, I used this large gather sign that I picked up at the Goodwill and started by removing the hanger from the back and gently popping the back off of the frame. Here you can see that there were some tiny nails that were holding the back in place, so I took a small pair of nail pullers and removed them. Then I took a putty knife and removed the word from the front. I also removed the excess paper and glue from the back of the frame, as well as the paper from the backing. I then used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint both pieces front, back, and sides. Next, I took one of these 18-inch wooden DIY hanging skeletons from the Dollar Tree and used a pair of pliers to open the jump rings to separate the pieces. I then took some wood filler and filled in the holes on the torso, head, and right arm and hand. Once that was dry, I sanded over all of the holes so that they were nice and smooth. I took Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and painted the front and sides of all the pieces. I then arranged the skeleton pieces how I wanted them and placed the frame on top and used a pencil to mark where I needed to cut the torso so that it would fit. I then took a sharp utility knife and scored along the pencil marks a few times and snapped the piece off. Then, to finish up this project, I used some hot glue to reattach the back onto the frame and arrange the skeleton how I wanted it to look, and used some hot glue to adhere all of the pieces in place, and this one is finished. Y'all, I love how this piece turned out. This is probably my favorite out of today's video. For this project, I used one of these MDF boo signs that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I started by removing the hanger from the back and using Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint the entire piece. I then took apple barrel paint in the color elephant gray and used it to paint the middle section of the sign on just the front and sides. Once that was done, I used a wadded up paper towel along with some more plaster paint to blend in the harsh line at the top until I was happy with the way it looked. I did go ahead and alternate the colors as needed to get the look that I wanted. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint the bottom half of the sign on the front and the sides, and again used a paper towel to blend in the harsh line, alternating the gray and black paints as needed. I then took two of these wooden ghost ornaments from this pack that I picked up at the Dollar Tree and used Waverly chalk paints in the color plaster and ink along with apple barrel paint in the color elephant gray to paint both of them the same way that I did the sign on the front and the back. Once that was done, I took 6 of these medium wooden beads from Amazon and used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint 2 of them, apple barrel paint in the color elephant gray to paint 2 others, and Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint the last 2. I then took 2 pieces of this white rope from the Dollar Tree hanging shelves and hot glued both ends of one of the pieces together and fed it through the hole at the top of one of the ghosts, going from the front to the back and then feeding the tails through the loop to create a large head knot. Next, I placed 3 of the beads onto the rope in the order of black, gray, and white and cut off the glued ends. I then repeated this step on the other ghost. Once that was finished, I used hot glue to attach one ghost to the front of the sign hanging off of the top of the bee and the other ghost hanging off the exclamation point. I took some of this white, gray, and black 3/8 inch ribbon from Walmart and created a messy bow with 3 of each of the colors of ribbon and another one with 2 of each of the ribbon colors, dovetailing the ends on all the pieces. Next, I used hot glue to attach the larger bow to the top of the rope on the first ghost and the smaller bow on the top of the rope on the bottom ghost. I then took 2 of these small black buttons from this container that I picked up at the Dollar Tree and used hot glue to attach one to the center of each of the bows. To finish up this project, I created a simple shoestring bow out of some of the black ribbon and a simple shoestring bow out of some of the gray ribbon and dovetailed the ends on both and used hot glue to attach the ribbons to the top of the ghost to cover up the holes. I placed the gray ribbon on the top ghost and the black ribbon on the bottom. I then added a hanger to the back, and this one is finished. Not only was this super easy and simple to make, it turned out really cute. For this project, I used another one of these hanging wood rounds from the Dollar Tree and started by removing the hanger and using Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint the bottom half, sides, and backs of the round. Once that was dry, I used Waverly antique wax to stain the top half and sides. Next, I used this Home Sweet Spooky Home stencil from Temu and used painter's tape to secure it to the bottom half of the wood round and used folk art paint in the color Pueblo along with a round sponge brush to paint the words, stars, and pumpkin with a stippling motion. Once that was dry, I took Anita's acrylic paint in the color white along with a round sponge brush and painted the ghost. I set that aside and allowed everything to fully dry and removed the stencil and cleaned up any of the bleeding, and I also filled in the gaps in the words and the ghost so that everything was solid. Next, I burnt the fuzzies off a piece of jute twine and replaced the hanger by feeding it through the back side of the holes and tying a knot on the front side to secure it in place and cut off any excess. I then took this black and white wired ghost ribbon from Temu, along with this wired orange and white burlap ribbon from the Dollar Tree, and off camera made one of my Frankenbows, layering the ghost ribbon over the top of the burlap and dovetailing the ends. Then, to finish up this project, I used a generous amount of hot glue to attach the bow to the top of the door hanger and fluffed up the loops, and this one is finished. I really do love how this turned out. It was super quick and easy to make and looks absolutely adorable. For this project, I used this 14 by 16 inch wood frame that I picked up on clearance at Hobby Lobby and started by placing it down on a piece of scrap cardboard and tracing around the inside edge as well as the first layer outside the opening in the middle. I then connected the outside ring and cut it out. Next, I took some hot glue and placed it along the outside edges of the cardboard and placed the frame on top. I then took some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and painted the entire piece front, back, and sides. Once that was dry, I used some antique gold rubbing buff and applied it heavily around the front of the frame to give it an antique look. Next, I took this 35-inch skeleton that I've had in my stash for a couple of years and removed its head and cut off the hanger. I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink as the base coat, and when that was dry, I used apple barrel paint in the color antique white and gave it 2 good coats, leaving the inside of the eyes and the nose black. Once that was completely dry, I took some Waverly antique wax and a damp paper towel and distressed and aged the skull, making sure to wipe away any of the excess. Next, I removed the wooden dowel and used wire cutters to remove the piece of plastic at the base of the skull. I used some hot glue to attach the skull to the center of the frame, but I do recommend using a stronger adhesive. I chose to use hot glue for video purposes. I then took some fake cobwebs from Dollar Tree and covered the entire front of the frame, including the skull, with a thin layer and cut off the excess. Next, I traced some large and small butterflies onto some cardstock and cut them out. I then took Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and some antique gold rubbing buff and painted them front and back to match the frame. Once they were dry, I folded the wings upwards to give them some dimension and movement. To finish up this project, I used some hot glue to attach one of the large butterflies to the top of the skull to cover up the hole, another large one to the left cheek, and a small one to the right jaw. I then continued to attach the rest of the butterflies to the back of the frame around the skull in a way that I thought looked best, and this one is finished. I absolutely love how this piece turned out. It was pretty easy to make, and it makes a big statement. And that's it for today's video, y'all. I hope y'all really enjoyed the video, and if you did, please be sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It really does help me out here on YouTube, and I'm working on my goal of 20,000 subscribers. I appreciate y'all watching, and I would love to know which one of these projects is your favorite. You can let me know in the comments below. As always, I'll see y'all next time.